Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted better performance, connection, and creativity in your life, then do we have the Bring Your Whole Self to Work show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mike Robbins, the best-selling author of Focus on the Good Stuff, Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Taken, and Nothing Changes Until You Do, and his latest, greatest masterpiece, that's really fun to boot, Bring Your Whole Self to Work. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about how vulnerability unlocks creativity, connection, and performance. That plus we'll talk about Hunter Pence and Willie Mack, the Yankees and the Royals, authenticity and obnoxiousness, earthquakes in Napa, Skyline High and Don Lippy, and what in the world sweaty palmed conversations have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Mike. Are you ready to shine?
Absolutely, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, thanks for being here, and a mighty woohoo! So before we dive right into things, have you always been, particularly in your early years, quite vulnerable yourself?
I mean, I think I was always a pretty sensitive kid, and, growing up, I mean, I had some challenges, as many of us do when we're kids. My parents split up when I was 3, and my dad suffered from bipolar disorder and wasn't really around a lot in my life from an early age and was kind of in and out. So, was I vulnerable? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I also was raised by my single mom, and my older sister had big influences on me. So I was very in touch with my emotions for sure. And then, I'm sure you can relate to this as a young man growing up, for us as boys in particular, once you get to school and start playing sports and, it's easy for people to pick on you and like boys don't cry and suck it up and be a man, all that stuff. So it was confusing for me, as I think it is for many of us as human beings, particularly as boys and young men. So I had a bit of a challenge with that as I was going through school. But I always had this sense, part of what drew me to this kind of work over all the years was like I'd be sitting in class as a kid and I'd listen to the teacher talk about whatever trigonometry or whatever, and I'd want to raise my hand and go, how does this relate to my life? And what do I do about all these feelings I have inside of me? And how come we're not talking about that?
And what's fascinating to me, and I was the bullied kid who didn't take the bus. I appreciated not taking the bus. I became a better runner for it. Yes. But I was a little too open-hearted and sensitive. I wore my emotions on my sleeves, and I didn't even understand the formula of keeping it inside.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we learn that, boys and girls, men and women, we learn in different ways, different environments, sort of how to cover that up to some degree. But it's hard, and it's good in some ways you didn't learn it, although I'm sure, you took your fair share of verbal abuse from kids growing up. But I do think one of the things that's interesting, I wrote about this in one of my previous books, with my baseball background, one of my favorite days of the baseball season was actually the last day. And sometimes you'd win the championship and it would be great, but a lot of times on the last day of the season you would lose. And I remember that even as a kid playing Little League, and then when I was in junior high school and high school, sometimes even like the toughest kids on the team, they would cry when we would lose. And it was always this weird, like no one made a big thing about it. No one picked on anyone or pointed fingers, but it was like they'd sometimes put their glove over their face, but I'd look and say, oh, wow, look at Jimmy, he's crying. Like it would make me not in any way judge him, but just feel more connected to him and like, oh, he's a real human being like me. Like there's nothing wrong with me, because I was the kind of kid that was pretty sensitive and would often cry, although I tried to cover it up so as to not get made fun of.
It's fascinating. Thank you for sharing on that. And what's fascinating to me is being in such a, you were, I don't know if phenom's the right word for it, extremely successful in your early years in a sport that is very machismo oriented. You're supposed to spit. You're supposed to kind of scratch yourself in public. This is not where you show your emotions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I grew up playing baseball, got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees, didn't end up signing with the Yankees because I got a chance to play baseball in college at Stanford, and then got drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals and signed a pro contract. The way that it works in baseball, is some people who are listening or watching us may know, is, you've got to go into what's called the minor leagues. And there's a bunch of levels of the minor leagues. You have to try to work your way up. Unfortunately for me, my third season still in the minors with Kansas City, I was a pitcher and I went out to pitch one night and I threw one pitch. I tore ligaments in my elbow and that was it. 3 surgeries later and a couple years later, I finally had to retire. But I basically played baseball from the age of 7 until I got hurt at 23 and then retired at 25. And to your point, I mean, it definitely wasn't the most emotionally safe environment, so to speak. The things that, I made some good friends and met some really good people along the way playing baseball, but my personality and my sensitive nature, it was challenging for me in sports in a lot of ways. But at the same time, even to your point earlier, when you were joking about learning things by not taking the bus, I actually learned a lot in that environment about myself and about how could I show up open-hearted, passionate, emotional, even in an environment that might seem as though that's not necessarily celebrated. So it was an interesting kind of relational and emotional journey for me to take, which I learned a lot from.
Wow. And I can also see that at times you would wear the mask and at times you weren't. And so you can understand people in business and other areas of their life. You can actually see their mask and see what's on the other side of it.
Exactly. Well, one of the things that I see now in the work, I work with a lot of business people in big companies, small companies. And when I come in and we're talking about business things and people are there showing up to do their jobs and produce their results and all those things that are important and what a lot of us get paid to do, is that underneath the mask, as you reference, now I know, because I remember back from my days as an athlete. Now, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was just kind of weird and crazy and sensitive. And I'd look around and all the other guys seemed like they were all tough and strong. And inside I had all this fear and doubt and insecurity. Of course, I now realize everybody feels that way, not just baseball players, not just business people, but, kids in school, moms at home, executives in the boardroom, and all the way across the board, that we're just dealing with being human. And so a big part of my work, and particularly my new book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, is about how can we take that mask off, or as I like to say, lower the waterline on the iceberg to express and expose a little more of who we really are authentically, both as a way to liberate ourselves, but also as a way to connect more genuinely with other people.
Awesome. Before we dive more into that, I've got to ask, because we have a little bit of a tandem path, which is I went to Europe to race bicycles as a kid. As in my early 20s, and I raced in Europe for several years and was climbing the ladder there before I had a woman in the French Alps driving a full-size Peugeot pull out of a side road, and as I was being waved through a blind turn, got waved right into her car. And the doctors told me I hurted the automobile. And I said, au contraire. Their English was slightly off. But that was at the time the end of my career. And that was in my early 20s, just about the same age as you. Integration was and so I wonder how you went through that transition. I know you had a friend, Brian, who helped you with a very specific question. But what was going on in your mind, and how were you able to get through that?
Well, it was hard. I got hurt at 23. It sounds like around the same time you had your own injury, and baseball had been so much of my life and my identity, and especially with some of the challenges growing up, and we didn't have a lot of money, and there was, I was a pretty ambitious, goal-oriented, kid, and then teen, and then young man, and so I was very focused on this goal of making it to the major leagues for a variety of reasons. And it was hard. It was sad. It was devastating. Because it felt like, like the car pulls out and you get in this accident. For me, I throw one pitch, I tear ligaments in my elbow. It felt like my body let me down. And there was an element of it that didn't seem fair, didn't seem right. Yeah. And I didn't really know what to do. Thankfully, really great friends and family, some good therapists and counselors that I worked with. As I look back on it now, and given the conversation we're having here and the type of work that I do, it really was an opportunity for spiritual growth for me. At the time, like a lot of times when we get those opportunities for growth, they're not necessarily the most pleasurable or easy to experience, but it really set me down a path that I'd already started even before I got injured, but more deeply trying to both heal physically, but then mentally, emotionally, but then starting to ask some deeper questions like, who am I and why am I here and what's my life really about? Because even if I'd made it to the major leagues and made a bunch of money as an athlete, that was still going to be a relatively short amount of what I would hope would be a very long life. And my life was going to be much more than simply about playing baseball. So it sort of brought me to my knees and definitely bruised my ego significantly. But in hindsight, I can look back on it now and say it was a huge blessing. But if it weren't for the therapists and coaches and mentors and friends and family around me at the time, I'm not exactly sure what would have happened.
Yeah. Well, I'll give the second half of that a woohoo, because at the time for me, I thought, and I was on a spiritual path, but I thought God is dead, there is no God. How could this have happened to me? But in hindsight, when you look back, that's what steers us and guides us. That's what helped you. I would call you, and it's a book we're working on, I would call you an open-hearted warrior. And having to go through that experience, that's what it made you.
Yeah, well, and I do think for a lot of us, like it's not that we need to experience suffering in order to have compassion. However, one of the benefits that comes from our pain, and then ultimately even our suffering from that pain, is it does give us an enormous amount of compassion for humanity, for human beings, for what, not everybody runs into a car on their bike. Not everyone hurts their arm playing baseball, but everybody goes through experiences in life where something happens that they didn't want to have happen, or that's really painful or sad or disorienting. And you referenced it a few minutes ago about my friend Brian, and I write about this in my new book. Brian is a friend of mine, and we've known each other for a number of years. And right after I got injured and came home and I'd gotten a job, I moved back. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, got a job working in the tech world about 20 years ago during the sort of dot-com boom time. And I was still trying to sort myself out post-baseball, like who am I and what am I going to do? I had this job, but Brian knew I was struggling, and he took me out to lunch one day and he said, "Hey, Mike, look, when you go through something difficult in life, there's a tendency to ask a really simple but very dangerous question." He said, "The question is, why did this happen to me? Or why is this happening to me?" He said, "It makes sense. I'd be asking that question if I were you." He said, "The problem with the question, though, is if you keep asking it, the only place it leads you is down a hole where you basically come up with reasons or justifications or explanations for why it's not fair and why you're a victim." He said, "But if you change one word in that question, it'll fundamentally change the way you're relating to this challenge and any challenge you face." He said, "Change the word to the word for. Why is this happening for me?" Now, he said it doesn't mean you like it or you think it's wonderful or it's great, or it's not that it's great. It's just it challenges you to get into more of what we call growth mindset, is what I would call it now, right? Looking for the opportunity, looking for the blessing, even in the pain and the difficulty.
Thank you for sharing on that. Woohoo!
Yeah.
I really want to turn this in a positive direction, but these are all experiences that have led to where you are. And this one, I believe, led directly to this book. Would you mind sharing about your sister in 2012 and what was going on at that time?
Yeah, so my sister Lori, who's my older sister, 4 years older than me, and again was like almost like a mini mother to me, given the way we grew up with our single mom and our dad not around. My sister Lori got diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of 2012, and this was about 9 months after our mom had died, actually, of lung cancer. So it was and my sister at the time was 42. Her daughter, she was a single mom, had just gotten recently divorced, and her daughter was 7. My girls at the time were probably about 2 and 6. And so it was incredibly scary, incredibly painful. Anybody listening to us who's gone through their own illness or the illness of someone close to them, a diagnosis like that, knows just how life-altering and shocking it can be, especially coming on the heels of having just lost our mom not that long before that. Lori went through a really courageous journey with cancer, was in remission, and the cancer came back. And in early 2016, she passed away right before her 46th birthday. And, there's a lot I could say about it. One thing I would say about my own experience, having lost both my parents and my sister now, is that grief and the loss of people close to us can be incredibly painful and difficult on so many levels. And at the same time, without sugarcoating it or minimizing it at all, I have also found it to be incredible in terms of my own growth, my own healing, my own spiritual evolution, like to really be that close to death. And I know you and I talked before we hit record here on the interview that you've had a couple near-death experiences yourself. And I think either if we go through it or someone close to us goes through it, as scary and painful as it can be, it also wakes us up to the reality that this time in this physical body is finite. Mm-hmm. And we all kind of know that, but we don't really live like that. So Lori's illness and her passing, as painful and difficult as they were and even still are, were incredible reminders for me that life is right now. Mm-hmm. And, I was just in the very early stages of potentially writing this new book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work. My publisher, Hay House, and I had agreed on the contract for the book about a month before Lori passed. And I ended up doing something I'd never done before with any of my previous books. In the middle of 2016, I realized I can't write this book right now. I just wasn't ready. I was going through too much emotionally, a lot of change in my life and integrating and moving through my own journey of grief. So I actually asked my publisher, can we push pause And can I wait for a little longer to write the book? Because I felt like if I was going to do justice to really writing this book, I needed to be a little more open and present and clear in my own life and where I was to be able to do so. And so I really wanted to write a bit of that story and Lori's story and my journey through that in the introduction of the book, because whether people are going through grief or loss or not, we're all dealing with stuff. And I think we spend and waste a lot of time and energy trying to cover it up instead of really embracing it and leaning into it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I love that term, leaning into it. I think that's so important. And it's the opposite of what we've been trained as society to do. Stuff it away, push it away, drink it away, anything away, but never lean into the pain. But that pain is our teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love the saying, you've probably heard it before, if you're going through hell, keep going. Do you know what I mean? Like, just keep going, because on the other side of it, I was just talking to someone the other day who works with teens, and the focus of her work is on suicide prevention. And what she was talking about suicide for teens, it's this permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? And part of, I think we can all relate to this, whether we're teenagers or not. We all were teenagers at some point. That feeling of fear and pain and overwhelm and like, I can't handle this. And people who go so far as to take their own life, as sad as that is, in reality, without minimizing the pain of that, it's like, oh, if there was some way that those individuals could be reminded that, like, yes, it's hard, yes, it's painful right now, but you know what? You will get through this and get to the other side. And having, in my own life and my own experience, gone through a couple of serious bouts of depression and other difficult times and heartbreak and loss, not just my baseball career, but other times, it's remembering that this too shall pass. And the truth of that statement, actually, it's also true when things are really great. And I don't say that to rain on anyone's parade, but it's like my friend Dan Millman, who wrote Way of the Peaceful Warrior, said something years ago. He said, Mike, people come up to me after, sometimes when I give a talk, and they say, Dan, I'm so inspired. And he said, I look at them and I say, don't worry, it'll pass.
Oh, no.
Right? And he said, I don't say that to be mean or cynical, but the reality is that, like, life ebbs and flows. Our moods change, our excitement, our passion, right? I mean, they do. And I think at some level, without being cynical about it, is just to understand the sort of natural ebb and flow of life. I think sometimes even on our journey of growth and development, and even with our desire to really practice the law of attraction and really have our vibration be really high and be as positive as, I for a living, I'm a motivational speaker, right? Your show here is about inspiration. And the reality is, like, I'm not motivated 24/7. I'm not inspired every moment of the day. Like, there are days and moments where I'm like, yeah, right in this moment, I feel like crap. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's the truth. And I think sometimes telling the truth about how we feel or where we're at is actually access to moving us to another place.
Woohoo! Yeah, I got here to our dream home, which was a whole thing of law of attraction and everything. And the backdrop that you see behind me is actually just a few miles from where I am I am in my home. That's the view behind the house.
That's awesome.
It's just how it came together is incredible. And yet, after this truck drive, after getting here, all of my negative emotions came back. And all of a sudden, I'm in Shangri-La. Jessica would say, better than Shangri-La. And all of the genes are flipping on the negativity. But they're waves, and I'm the ocean. So I can't stuff it down. In fact, I'm going to journal. I'm going to write about it. I'm going to do EFT tapping and everything to work on this and shred it and be done with it. But the fact is, that's not who we are. We're never our emotions. We're much deeper and broader and, I guess, breadth and depth than that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, look, you just went through a big move. And even when something really exciting happens, one of the things I remember learning years ago from a teacher of mine, he was saying to me that most of us seek and fear change at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? We want things to change. We're excited, right? We have our vision board. I mean, my vision board's right up behind me here in my office. I love it. Like, what do I want? What am I creating? And even when really positive change happens, when we actually moved into this new home that we live in and have been here for a couple of years, I remember you can probably relate to this to some degree, about 2 weeks after we moved in and we got, somewhat settled, and my wife really likes to unpack and get everything in place. And so we're working really hard, and we went to bed one night and I rolled over and I said, how come I feel upset? And she's like, what do you mean? I said, I don't know why, but like this whole process, as exciting as it is, much as we love this home, I'm upset. And she was like, I know, me too. And we started talking more about it. We were kind of laughing, and we realized that even positive change that we want can be upsetting, especially at first, because it's new, it's different. We have to integrate it. We have to adjust to it. We have to, right? And so at some level, it's like understanding and having compassion for ourselves with that and going, oh, that's just kind of part of being human, doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means, oh, right? I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice. Back to the point I was making earlier, and you acknowledged it about leaning in. Again, feeling our fear or feeling our anger or our sadness or our disappointment or whatever isn't inherently negative as long as we really lean into it, feel it, and move through it. It's when we avoid it, or when we say, no, I'm only positive. No, I never get upset. No, I'm never angry. I'm never scared. It's like,
watch out for the volcano.
Exactly.
You brought that with you when you had your meeting with Hay House on this book. You brought that authenticity, you brought that vulnerability with you to wear your emotions, to wear your, in a sense, fears and concerns on your sleeve.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a story I tell in the book about a previous book that I was pitching. And in the meeting to pitch the book, this was my book, Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Already Taken, that I wrote a few years back. But I didn't realize that when I was going to the meeting to pitch the book that the president of the publishing company was going to be there. And I was excited, but really nervous. Like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize, she would be there. And so as I start my little pitch, instead of getting less nervous, I was getting more nervous, but I was sort of pretending like I was fine. And a few minutes into it, I finally just stopped and I said, listen, I know I mentioned this when you came into the room. It's really an honor to meet you. I said, but I noticed that I'm trying hard to impress you because I'm feeling so nervous. I said, can I just stop doing that now and be myself? And it was funny because there was like an awkward pause after I said it, and everyone around the table and in the room was like, did he really just say that out loud? But what was interesting was after that awkward moment, there was some laughter and there was more of an exhale, particularly from me. And I said to them, look, here's what I know about authenticity. I know it's important. I know it's important to me, to just about everybody I know, to all the clients I work with. It's important in life. It's important in business. It's just important. I said, but it's hard. I said, I want to write a book about that. And then we just proceeded to have a conversation for like 45 minutes about authenticity and why it can be hard. And what was interesting, I mean, again, this was like 8 or 9 years ago, and they ended up saying, yes, they wanted to publish the book. It was my second book, and I was really excited, but I learned something really important that day, that even in those situations where we really have to sort of be on and perform and say the right thing, and, as important as it is to be prepared, and you probably know this from hosting your show and just doing, and people listening to us or watching us know, just there's different times in life. Like, it's important that we show up, but sometimes we focus so much on being prepared or saying the right thing or doing the right thing that we forget that what's even more important is being present and actually connecting and responding to the moment.
Woohoo! Going from authenticity, and thank you so much for sharing on that. How do you define vulnerability?
Well, vulnerability, the definition that I love for vulnerability actually is one that I learned from Dr. Brene Brown at the University of Houston. She defines vulnerability as emotional exposure, risk, and uncertainty. So emotional exposure, risk, and uncertainty. And can you think of anything meaningful or important that you've ever accomplished or experienced in your life, personally or professionally, that did not involve emotional exposure, risk, or uncertainty?
Sitting on the couch?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you sit on the couch and watch television, if you don't do anything that matters, right, that matters to you. And I'm not saying that we have to go out and, run a marathon or write a book or climb Mount Everest or whatever, but anything that really matters to us relationally, right, our most important relationships, any goal that we have, anything that we want to accomplish or experience, it's personal, it's professional, it's even spiritual, it's going to take some element of risk or uncertainty or emotional exposure, or maybe even all three. And the weird part is, though, and I think Brene Brown and other people who've been doing work around vulnerability, particularly in the last number of years, are starting to shift our mindset and our perspective about it, because most of us think of vulnerability as something bad, or it's weakness, or we should protect ourselves and don't have ourselves be vulnerable. Because look, at a basic level, physical vulnerability is about, I could get hurt, so I need to protect myself physically. And there is some truth to that, if you will. Like, I put on the seatbelt when I get in the car. I trust the universe, and I still put my seatbelt on.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I trust the universe, and I still lock the doors in my house. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, but emotional vulnerability and personal vulnerability is really about living, embracing that sense of risk, uncertainty, and being willing to expose ourselves emotionally, knowing that sometimes I may fall down, I may get hurt, it may not work out, but by being willing to do that, I am much more likely to succeed or experience whatever it is I really want to experience.
Woohoo! Let's talk about, you share an amazing story about vulnerability, being in Japan, and a translator, and something lost. And I dated a Japanese girl. I was actually engaged to a Japanese girl a long, long time ago. I understand cultural challenges here, Ian, and lack of words.
Yes. Well, so I was in Japan. So one of my clients is The Gap, right? Big retail organization here in the U.S. and around the world. They have stores and sell clothes. And so I do a lot of work with The Gap, and they invited me to speak in Japan at a leadership academy they were having for about 300 of their store managers and field leaders. And they've had this event in the U.S. a number of times, and I'd spoken at it. And they said, Mike, here's the deal, though. Everyone at the event speaks Japanese, so we're going to have a simultaneous translation, which basically means someone would have a little thing in their ear. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone in the audience had a little thing in their ear, and then a translator in the booth would translate it into Japanese. And so always a little challenging for me when I speak in environments like that, because I speak pretty quickly. And as culturally sensitive as I try to be, the moment I step outside of the United States, I immediately realize, oh my gosh, like my worldview is so American, like so many references. Anyway, so I meet with the translator before the event. I don't usually use slides when I speak, and I was doing the opening keynote, and she's all stressed out because she's like, I don't have any slides, I don't have a script, I don't have an outline, what are you going to talk about? And I said, well, I'm going to talk about a number of things, but one of the things I'm going to talk about in the context of authenticity and authentic leadership is the importance of vulnerability. And she says, vulnerability? And I said, yeah, vulnerability. She says, vulnerability? I said, yeah, vulnerability. She said, there's no word for that in Japanese. And I was like, what? She said, well, there is a word, but it's a bad word. And now I was like fascinated, right? I'm like, ooh, what is it? What does it mean? And she goes, it means weakness. And I said, interesting. I said, most people think that's what it means in English too. And then she looks at me and she's like mad. She says, why would you tell anyone to be vulnerable? And I said to her, well, my research and my experience has taught me two really important things about vulnerability. First of all, it's the key driver in human trust and connection. So if you're going to connect with people, and I'm about to speak to a group of leaders in this room, like, they need to be able to be vulnerable. And I said, secondly, it's also sort of the birthplace of innovation, of change, of creativity, of anything new or different. She wasn't buying it. Now I'm having like a standoff with the translator. I was already nervous about giving this speech, right? An hour-long speech to 300 leaders in Japan. And right, I said to her, listen, do me a favor, translate what I say as best you can. If it doesn't make sense or it's not, doesn't translate, it's not culturally sensitive, I don't know, if it doesn't work, I'll figure it out. Yeah. Now, the truth was, I didn't know how I was going to figure it out.
Because you wouldn't even know.
No, I wouldn't know, right? I just wanted to stop talking to her because she was scaring me, right? But so I get up on stage and, no slides, so I don't have to talk about vulnerability. But I'm in my head going, should I not? Okay, and then I'm like, I can't talk about authenticity without talking about vulnerability. So I start to talk about it. And then I immediately look at her in the translating booth and I'm thinking, what is she saying to them? Because she could be saying anything, right? She could be saying, don't listen to this crazy American. Like, I have no idea. But it seemed like it was resonating. Yeah. I couldn't quite tell. But I finally got done after my presentation. I go to the back of the room to take my little microphone off at the AV table. The next presenter came up with speaking Japanese, so he didn't need her translation services. She gets out of the translation booth. She walks across the back of the ballroom over to me, and she says, thank you for your presentation. I said, you're welcome. She said, I don't think I understood what you meant earlier when you were talking about vulnerability. She said, but after listening to you talk, I think I understand now. She said, vulnerability is not bad. It's just hard. I said, you're right. It's hard. It's risky. It's scary to be vulnerable because we put ourselves out there, right? It's like what you and I, Michael, were talking about earlier as kids, wearing our heart on our sleeve and sometimes having the kids make fun of us or point fingers at us or call us names or pick on us or whatever. And it's not just, we're not kids on the school bus getting picked on, but in life, wherever we are in life, if we choose to be vulnerable, if we choose to be, right, step into that risk, that emotional exposure, that uncertainty, we might get hurt. We might fall on our face. It might not turn out. We may tell someone we love them and they may not say it back. We may ask for a job and that someone might say no. We might go for a goal and it might not turn out. All the things that we've all experienced before as human beings, and we don't like it, it doesn't feel good. But instead of going for it again, we sometimes say, I'm not going for it because I don't want to feel like that.
Yeah. It isn't living.
Yeah.
Why? Why is it then so important? Why would you teach leaders to be vulnerable, to expose themselves, to, I think it was the last guest, talked about rolling on our backs and exposing our bellies. Why do we want to do that?
Well, for a couple reasons. First of all, it liberates us. Think about how much time and energy we spend as human beings trying to act like we have it together, which is exhausting, right? And for leaders, when I'm inside of organizations, and again, it could be a big company, it could be a small company, it could be, but this is true in families, this is true in church groups, this is true in any group. Anyone who finds themselves in a leadership position, like a role, or wants to have influence, They did a study at Google a few years back, and what they were studying, they spent 3 years, and they called it Project Aristotle, and they were studying, first they started within their company, and then they actually looked at companies around the world in different industries and looked at all this data and metadata for like basically what creates the conditions for groups and teams to perform at the highest level. And after 3 years of studying this, they came back with 5 primary conditions that create high performance. And the number one condition is what they call psychological safety. And what psychological safety is basically it's trust at a group level. Mm-hmm. It means I can be myself. I can disagree. I don't have to look the same, talk the same, act the same, dress the same. I can make a mistake. I can fall on my face, and I'm not going to get kicked out of the group. I'm not going to get shamed or shunned or ridiculed for taking a risk, right? And when you think about it, again, whether it's your family, mm-hmm. whether it's a business that you're a part of in some way, whether it's a group of any kind, when you have that psychological safety in the group, we're more likely to take risks. We're more likely to be bold. We're more likely to actually succeed and thrive. And so for leaders, if a leader creates that kind of environment by the way he or she operates, I say to leaders all the time, if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you make it 10 times harder for the people around you to be vulnerable because you're the leader, right? If the leader stands up and says, you know what, I screwed up, or you know what, I'm feeling a little scared, or you know what, I'm not really sure about this, it's not that we all of a sudden don't trust him or her. In fact, we trust them more because it's like, oh, they'll actually say how they're feeling. And then guess what? They just gave us permission that we get to be human too. But if the leader stands up or says to us, you know what, I got it all together, I never worry about any of this stuff, what are you worried about? Get over it, or things like that, all of a sudden it makes it less psychologically safe. And then people start thinking, well, maybe I'm crazy, or maybe I'm weird, or maybe I'm not supposed to ask this question or admit this fear or ask for help or try something where I might fail. Everyone then is walking on eggshells.
I had never thought of bringing up this example today, but it popped into my head of United Airlines and what happened with the passenger who had a rough day after they tried to bump him off the airline. And there was a chain of command that my guess is had anything but allowing vulnerability or authenticity to be, or communication for that matter, to be shared.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I think in situations like that, and sometimes they can be extreme, and we see them now with social media and people capture it on film and all these things happen. I think sometimes what breaks down is the human connection, you know, one human being to another. I mean, speaking of airlines, it's funny. I remember a few years back, I travel a lot because I'm out speaking, and I was on a flight. It was actually Southwest Airlines, and it got delayed. We were coming through Denver, I think, and I had to get to San Diego, and I was coming. It was a long story, but basically, there were no more flights going to San Diego, so I was going to have to spend the night there, and I needed to be there the next morning to speak at an event. So I was a little stressed out, and I'm waiting in line, and it had been a weather thing. And so anyway, the woman is at the front, and everyone's mad, and they're yelling, and they're all this. And I get to the front, and I said, so what's the deal? And she goes, well, there's no more flights to San Diego tonight. She said, there's a flight first thing in the morning, but it's full, but you can come and stand by, and you might get on it, you might not get on it. I said, okay. And I said, well, what do I do? Where do I go sleep? She goes, well, you can sleep here at the airport, or you can, you know, get in a cab and go to a hotel. And I said, and do you guys pay for that? And she said, no, it was weather, not mechanical, so it's not our responsibility. I said, so let me get this straight. I might or might not be able to get on a flight in the morning. I need to be in San Diego to speak at this event. I can either sleep here at the hotel, at the airport, or go get a hotel on my own dime. And I was like, man, that's rough. And she goes, yeah, it is. She goes, imagine having to tell hundreds of people that tonight. And wow. I looked at her and I said, well, you know what? You're right. That's worse. And I in that moment, even though I was upset, I wasn't really upset with her. I was upset with the situation, but I had that moment of human connection with her that as a human being, she had to communicate this sort of bad news to all these upset, angry people all night. And I had an enormous amount of empathy for what that must have been like for her. You know, and again, I think sometimes in life, and it doesn't excuse people's behavior, but what we forget is that like most of the time people are trying to do the best they can. And what can happen in business and in life when we get frustrated or irritated or we don't understand why is this how, it's just like, can we make a human connection? You know, one of the things that I've heard lots of people, Brene Brown included, talk about is it's like it's really hard to hate people up close. And what that means is the closer we get to someone, the more real we can be with each other. It's harder to otherize them. Oh, those people over there. You know, the people in the other office, the people in the other part of the country, the people doing that other thing, even the people in our family who drive us crazy, whatever. It's like we get close to them, we start connecting human being to human being, right? The natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. Mm-hmm. So when we can share some empathy, some vulnerability, I should say, with each other, there becomes more empathy. I was on an airplane a couple weeks ago, actually, and a guy, there was it was one of the airplanes where they have the TVs playing and the news was on, and he starts spouting off about something, and we had very different political views. And we got into this argument about politics sort of out of the blue. And I was like, I'm not going to get into it, but he really went for it. And I was like, okay, well, you started it. Here we go. We're having this whole discussion. But at one point I looked at him and I said, hey, man, you have kids, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, I have kids too. And I said, do you ever worry sometimes that maybe you're doing the wrong thing for your kids, even though you're trying to do the best you can? He said, yeah. And I said, I do too. Like, I try to be the best father I can for my girls, but sometimes I worry that I'm screwing up and like I'm doing the best I can and I don't know the right answer all the time and the world's complicated and it's like whatever. And he said, yeah, me too. And I said, okay. I said, so maybe, just maybe, you and I have these opinions about politics and what we think is right and wrong. Like, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know what's right. And it's just, I'm just doing the best I can. And it was like we had this moment of vulnerability, human connection, separate from our disagreements and our arguing about this and that. And it was like, to me, like that was the sweetest part of the whole conversation. Like I didn't convince him of any of my political beliefs and he didn't convince me of any of his, but we made a connection as human beings and found that common ground, like as fathers, as people who are trying to do the best we can to raise our children, but don't know if we are, like almost every other parent I know who's really honest. And that's again the place. Can we get to that place with each other at work and in life where we find that common ground where we're more alike than we are different?
Woohoo! There's an exercise, I believe you did it with the Japanese group, and you like to do this called the If You Really Knew Me exercise.
Yes. So the If You Really Knew Me exercise is really powerful. In fact, if you're up for it, Michael, we could do it right here, right now.
Let's do it.
Okay, let me sort of explain it and set some context, and then I'll go first, and then you can go after me if you're cool. So the way that this works, and for everybody listening or watching, I often do this exercise with groups. Again, a big group like the group in Japan, I'll have people pair up in the audience. If it's a smaller group, like a workshop setting, I might put people into small groups. Sometimes if I'm working with an entire, like an intact team, a leadership team, and there's 10, 12 people, I'll do it with the entire group and we'll do it all in one group. But the idea is, the metaphor that I use when we're talking about authenticity and vulnerability is the iceberg. So can we lower the waterline on our iceberg? Or Michael, as you mentioned earlier, take the mask off. Just be a little more real, a little more vulnerable. And so the way the activity works is, again, whether it's in pairs or in small groups or a larger group, everybody goes. And I'm going to go in just a moment, and then Michael's going to go, and just take a minute or two to just repeat the phrase, if you really knew me, you'd know this about me. And again, you don't have to say anything you don't want to say. It's really just, if in this moment, if we really knew you, what would you know, right? And it's a way, and I often encourage people, again, if you are a part of any group or team, or even in your own relationship, your marriage, with friends, if you're willing to do this, go first and just sort of set the tone, and you'd be amazed at what might happen, and people respond in kind. So I'll go right now. So let's see. If you really knew me in this moment, what would you know? If you really knew me, you would know I love having conversations like this and doing interviews like this, and sometimes, especially on video like it is, and I know some of you are probably listening to the audio, but we're also recording this on video. I get really distracted by seeing myself in the screen below, and I like the little critical voice in my head is like, dude, you look weird, and stop talking like that. What do you do? Like, it's just a constant, like, if you really, really knew me, you'd know that, like, I tend to be hypercritical of myself, particularly of my appearance, which even all these years into my life and all my growth and everything that I've done, it still seems to be one of the things that can mess with me. If you really, really, really knew me, you would know I'm super excited about this new book that I just wrote that's out. And even though it's my fourth one and I've done this before, it just feels really vulnerable to put a book out in the world. People have opinions, they have thoughts, they might buy it, they might not buy it. It's just that, like, it just sort of feels like a manifestation of wearing my heart on my sleeve, which I both think is important, but also at times can feel really scary. So those are some things, if you really knew me right in this moment, you would know.
Thank you so much for sharing. And if you really knew me right in this moment, then you would know that we're over 850 shows in. This is Candy. This is what I love the most. And it still scares me. Jessica hates me when I say that I'm shaking like a leaf, but I have a nervous excitement for every single interview as if it's my first, and I do everything I can to stay hyper present, because I too have that hypercritical voice inside of me that would love to nitpick this apart. And if I start to follow that voice, I will slip and fall from the conversation and go, huh? What was he saying? And that would be, to me, disastrous. So I do everything I can to stay present with you. with that said, that voice is one of my biggest teachers. That's what I wanted to share with you beforehand after reading your book, is that I still have that hypercritical voice that as far down the road as I am, I'm going, actually, the biggest fear for me, if I was to be truthfully honest, if you really knew me, then you would know my biggest fear is I'm going to say or do something and it will blow everything up. Mm-hmm. And occasionally I'll wake up with a screaming fear or screaming night dream that I've blown everything. How that would happen, I don't know. But if you really knew me, you would know that that is in me. And so there is a part of me that goes through the interview with just a little bit of fear or trepidation each time. But maybe on the other hand, that encourages me to do the best I can and encourages me to let it all go. So if you really knew me, then you would know that I'm afraid that if I share this, that my audience won't love me anymore, that my audience won't want to hear me. They're going to go flip to another channel because, well, that guy's not the perfect whatever that he says it is. I'm not. I promise you, I'm not.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. You know, of the many things that I appreciate about having this conversation with you right now and just having that conversation with people in general is it always amazes me how we're all so unique and different. Like our lives are different, our passions, our fears, they're different in terms of the content, the specifics of them, but they're so universal, right? Because like the further down below the waterline we go, the more similar we become. The more, right? Everything you just said, like I can relate to that. Just like I imagine you could probably relate to what I said.
Oh yeah.
And it's, again, sometimes someone can share something like, I'm going through this, or I had this illness or this injury or this challenge, or my relationship just broke up or whatever. And it may not be that I can relate to the specific, you know, a woman says I'm pregnant, 8 months pregnant. It's like, I can't relate to that personally, but what I can relate to is what are the underlying feelings, right? So what's that feeling of excitement, that feeling of fear, that feeling of joy, that feeling of sadness or whatever, the whole range of it. And what's beautiful about our ability to be authentic and even vulnerable with each other is, you know, it builds what I call personal credibility, right? Professional credibility is about our resume and our track record and where we went to school, or depending on what it is, how many, you know, of this or of that, you know, whatever the benchmarks are. And those things are important. Those things do matter in our professional lives. Our resume matters, or the results we've produced in the past. They do matter. But what matters more in terms of our relationships personally and especially spiritually is that personal credibility. Can I relate to you? Can I trust you, right? Can we hang in there with each other if we disagree or have a conflict? Are you willing to show me not just the polished up, perfect version of yourself, but like the real you? That builds real personal credibility. And I think sometimes, like when you said the thing about, oh, my audience won't love me or they'll go away, I can relate and imagine that feeling. But in my head, I'm thinking, gosh, the more real you are, the more willing people are to engage, the more people trust and go, yeah, I want to listen to him because, you know, again, the world that we live in, there's so much, we're swimming in information and we're starving for real wisdom and real depth.
That's why I love your book.
Woohoo!
So we've been talking more or less. We started to go along this framework of 5 key principles in your book. And I'm not sure we can even touch on briefly on all 5, but since we've been covering really the the authenticity section, maybe we'll jump just one key point and all the rest. We'll see what we cover before we wrap things up. Talking with you feels like something I could go on and we could have conversation after conversation on the brilliant book. I'll plug it even in the middle here. Get this book. Get this book.
Thank you.
With that said, bring your whole self to work. Principle number 2, utilize the power of appreciation.
Yeah. Well, an appreciation, I mean, I'm sure most everyone listening to us or watching us has some familiarity with the power of gratitude in particular. But appreciation, you know, in the business context, one of the things I've learned over the years of studying appreciation is that there's a distinction between recognition and appreciation. Both are important, but they're different. Recognition is positive feedback based on results or performance. Appreciation is actually about recognizing people's value. So recognition is more about what we do. Appreciation is more about who we are. And one of the stories I share in the book that I think really sort of underscores what this is. And you can appreciate this as someone who hosts this show. And I mean, I have my own podcast, so I interview people as well. But I heard Oprah speak a few years ago, and Oprah Winfrey said this great thing about, right, she said, I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people in my career. Like, I've interviewed everybody. I've interviewed, presidents and celebrities and prime ministers and children and criminal, you name the type of person. She said, I've interviewed them. She said, after all these years and all these interviews, she said, do you know that just about every single person asks me some version of the same question when the interview's over? She said, the camera shuts off, the interview's over, they lean over and they say, how'd I do? Or was that okay? Some version of that question. How'd I do? Was that okay? And she said, early in my career, I used to be confused by this question because I would be sitting across from someone who's very successful and accomplished. And I'd be wondering to myself, are they really that insecure? Like, do they really need my validation? What is that? Why are they asking me how they did? She goes, then I realized something. They're not actually asking me how they did. So you know what they're really asking me? Did you see me? Did you hear me? Did what I say matter? Right? And she said, and I agree with her, everybody's asking those questions. So the thing for us as human beings, at work, at home, in life, can we show up and actually see people and hear people and let them know not just what they say, but who they are matters, above and beyond whatever they do, above and beyond, like I think with my children or kids in general, above and beyond their behavior. I may not always like the behavior of my girls. However, I can appreciate and value them as human beings, right? At work, people don't always do things that are perfect. They don't always produce a great result necessarily. So we don't want to recognize them if it's something that, like, I didn't really like that, or that wasn't what we wanted. But we can always appreciate and value people. And then we might give them some feedback on their behavior or their performance or what we like or don't like. But those are two separate things. So when we separate them out, it allows us to actually connect with people more genuinely and empower them more.
Woohoo! Two quick points. I know we got to move along here, but there are two great tools that you mentioned in this chapter that I'd love to share with people. First off, heartfelt handwritten notes of appreciation.
Huge, right? I mean, as simple as it sounds, nowadays, I don't know about you, but I don't write nearly as many cards as I used to, right? With a lot of email and text and social media connections, which is fine, but the old go buy a box of thank you cards from the store. They still have them. You can find them. And to write someone a handwritten card. I mean, think about it when any of us get a handwritten card these days. Usually it comes from someone who's quite a bit older, number one, or number two. Even if that's not the case, it's amazing. You're like, wow. Think about on your birthday, right? When you get an actual card in the mail from someone and they let you know that, or whatever it is, versus I love when people say nice things on Facebook. That's great. But I really appreciate the card. So as a practice, it's something that really touches people and gets people's attention.
Woohoo! I sent Jessica out right before this interview. She was going out to the post office, and I just finished your book, and I'm like, go get some thank you notes. I've got some writing to do.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And on that note, the next tool is, what do you do when somebody says they appreciate you?
Oh, this is big. This is so simple, but this is profound. When someone expresses their appreciation to us or compliments us in any way, what we're supposed to say, and most of us know this, is thank you. Just say thank you. I often say, just say thank you and then shut your mouth. Now, the reason that I say that is because often what comes after the thank you is usually weird and insincere. Usually we give them a compliment right back. You too. And sometimes we mean it, but sometimes it's like so knee-jerk, it's so quick, it's like inappropriate. I always think of it like a birthday gift. If I came over to your house or your apartment on your birthday with a present, I said, hey, happy birthday, it would be weird if you like ran into the other room and came back and said, happy birthday to you too. But even worse, we argue with people. You ever do that? Someone gives you a compliment, you go, oh, no, it was terrible, or no, I screwed it, or whatever. What are you expecting them to say in response? Oh, you're right, you're an idiot, I was just kidding. Like, it's really weird. Again, it's like the birthday present. It would be strange if I came to your house or your apartment on your birthday with a gift and said happy birthday, and you went, what is wrong with you? I don't deserve this, and threw it on the floor. So what we need to do is just practice saying thanks, even and especially if we don't agree with them. Because many of us, like you and I were talking about earlier, a lot of us have a tendency to be really hard on ourselves, critical of ourselves. That little gremlin, that little critic in our head is constantly criticizing ourselves and thinking we're not doing it good enough. So someone comes and says, hey, nice job, or I really like this, or I value this about you, or I appreciate. Sometimes our little gremlin or our critic might be the one to respond. And I've learned over the years, my practice is when someone expresses appreciation to me, especially verbally in person, but even if it comes in a note or a card or an email, I don't react with my reaction to it, especially if I don't see it that way. I just simply say thank you. And sometimes I'll walk away from that interaction and think to myself, that's interesting. I don't necessarily think that about myself. Maybe I should, because that's a better opinion than the one I currently have.
Woohoo! We'll go to principle 3, focus on emotional intelligence. And I want to make sure we cover a few of your mindfulness practices.
Yeah, so emotional intelligence is really about, there's two aspects of it, right? There's self-awareness and self-management, which a mindfulness has a lot to do with that. And then there's social awareness and relationship management. And in our lives, particularly our professional lives, but our lives in general, focusing on our emotional intelligence as opposed to simply just focusing on our IQ, our intellect. Intellect's important, but I think as a culture, we over-index on intellect and under-index on, over-index on IQ and under-index on EQ. I got introduced at an event down at Adobe, one of my clients in Silicon Valley, and Jeff, who introduced me, he was the head of learning and talent at the time, and he got up and said, Mike's here to give a speech on, emotional intelligence. He said, I've always believed that your IQ gets you your job and your EQ gets you promoted. And I stood up and I said, hey, thanks, Jeff. I said, basically, that was the crux of the hour I was about to speak about. But, I think, again, whether it's at work or just in life, focusing on self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management is really important. And to your question earlier, your comment about mindfulness, look, a lot of people listening to us, watching us, I'm sure have their own meditation, mindfulness practices, whatever they may be. But whatever we can do in our lives to be more mindful and more present, it's going to benefit us personally. It's going to benefit our health, our well-being, our spiritual connection. It's also going to benefit our relationships and our ability to respond to the people around us. So like, I've been meditating off and on myself for about 20 years. And one of the things that really helped me personally, Michael, with meditation a few years back is when one of my counselors, Eleanor, who I love and have worked with for the last 6 years, gave me permission and said it was okay to meditate in bed. Because I'd always had this thing like, oh, it's fake meditation. I'm not really in the posture. I'm not really doing the thing. And finally, she's like, how do you prefer to meditate? I was like, well, I wake up in the morning. I go to the bathroom. I get back in bed. I lay down. And she's like, well, just do that. And I'm like, does that count? And she's like, who's judging this? And I was like, I don't know. And she goes, well, just do what works for you.
We call that, we have a term for it, napitation.
There you go. Well, it is challenging. I mean, it took me a number of years to get really good. I don't fall asleep when I do it.
Yep.
But for a long time I did. And again, the meditation practice that I have is more, there's a lot of visualization that I do, things that I see. Sometimes I even use audios that prompt me. But in general, for me, to relax my body and myself, I get more relaxed when I'm laying down and it's much easier for me to tap in. Again, I think for all of us, whatever our meditation practice might be, it's got to really work for us. Another thing that I've done for many years that's really simple, but I find it to be incredibly powerful is journaling. I've got two different journals that I carry around. They're sitting here actually right on my desk. One is I call it a regular journal where I share thoughts, ideas, sometimes inspiration, sometimes venting, whatever it is, the whole gamut. But it's my genuine, authentic thoughts and feelings, and I write that down. I have another journal that I keep where I put things down specifically that I'm grateful for. It's a gratitude journal, but I actually, about a year ago, added to the gratitude practice and actually started writing down a few things that I forgive myself for every day, so as to counteract some of that self-criticism that we were talking about earlier. And I find that can be a really powerful technique and tool for me to focus both on what I'm grateful for and what I appreciate, but also what I forgive myself for, so I can be a little kinder and gentler to myself.
That is huge. So on that note, let's go real quickly. Principle number 4, embracing a growth mindset.
Well, we talked about it earlier. I mean, growth mindset is really about looking at everything that comes our way as an opportunity to learn and grow. My friend Brian asking me that question, why is it happening for me? That's a great way to get into growth mindset. And it's really knowing that if we put effort and energy into something, we can improve at it. And whatever happens, even the most painful, difficult stuff, as you and I were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, everything's a growth opportunity. So if we take that approach to our life, to our work, to our relationships, then they're really, we might quote unquote fail sometimes, but we really only fail if we miss the lesson in whatever the challenge is.
Woohoo! So let's go from there real quickly. Principle 5, creating a championship team. And maybe you can tell us about Hunter Pence and I Love You.
So creating a championship team is really about empowering and inspiring the people around us, our families, our groups of any kind, if we again work in an environment where we work with a team. But the story that I tell at the end of the book, my baseball background, as I mentioned, most of my clients are companies of different types, but I do work with some pro sports teams. And the San Francisco Giants, one of our local baseball teams, pro baseball teams here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, hired me a number of years back to come in and give a talk. It really resonated. I've had a chance to work with the Giants over the last 8 years. And the Giants have won 3 championships in the last number of years. They won the championship in 2010, 2012, and 2014. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment, they've really focused a lot on chemistry and culture of their players and their coaches and the whole organization. And there was a moment at the end of the 2013 season where Hunter Pence, who's one of their best players, got an award at the end of the season and gave a speech right before the game. And I happened to be in the ballpark that night. And they weren't going to the World Series that year, to the playoffs even. They'd had kind of a disappointing season. But he got up to give this speech and he said, he thanked everybody. The crowd was there in the stands, 40,000 people right before the game. And he looked at all his teammates and he said, I want each and every one of you to know that I love you. And I was shocked when I heard him say that, because that's not normally something you hear professional athletes say out loud, right? Yeah. To what you and I were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. I played baseball for many years and played professionally, and in that machismo environment, there's not a lot of I love yous flying around in the locker room. But he said it, and he said, and I know some of you get uncomfortable when you hear me say that. You think it's soft. He said, in fact, I don't think it's soft. I think it's the most important thing that we have. And fast forward a year later, the end of the 2014 season, the Giants are back in the World Series. It's Game 7. It's the championship, right? They're in the bottom of the 9th inning in Kansas City on the road with the tying run on third base, and they get the final out of the World Series. They win their 3rd championship in the span of 5 years, which is incredible to do. And as Madison Bumgarner, who's their big burly pitcher from North Carolina, right, who won the game for them, goes to embrace Buster Posey, who's their all-star catcher, another big, strong guy from Georgia. The two of them embrace in the middle of the diamond. And right before the whole team comes to jump on top of them for them to all celebrate, Bumgarner leans over and whispers into Posey's ear. And you can actually even see this if you look at the video on YouTube. He says, I love you. And the team celebrates and everyone goes crazy. And I was sitting in Arizona in a hotel room watching the game on TV, and I'm so excited because they won and I work with them and I'm a fan and the whole bit. But when I saw that moment, it actually brought me to tears, and I thought, right there, that's it. That's what epitomizes a championship team. Being willing to be vulnerable enough. We love each other. We care about each other. We have each other's backs. It doesn't mean we always win. It doesn't mean everything goes perfect, but it means we make that commitment to one another. And it's bigger than whatever game we're playing. It's really about the people we're playing with.
Woohoo! So I want to take off my coach's hat, Mike. This has been phenomenal. I want to take off my coach's hat. I want to put it on you. What one homework assignment would you give people today to help their lives?
That's a great question. I think, the one that just popped into my mind is start asking for help more often. Because one of the things I find, Michael, is most of us love helping other people, but very few of us are comfortable asking for help.
Yeah.
It's a vulnerable and courageous act to do. And one reframe that I would offer to everybody is then when we ask for help, not only, sometimes we think, oh, I'm being selfish, or oh, they'll think I'm weak, or oh, they might say no, but realize it's actually a generous act because you're giving other people the opportunity to do something that most of us love, which is to help other people. And when we have the courage to be vulnerable enough to ask, we not only might get some help and support, which we could really use, we actually empower the people around us by letting them help. So it's a win for everybody.
Woohoo! And an add-on, a quick addendum to that is oftentimes we don't take help. Oh, no, I can do it myself. Right. And you're actually helping the other person by accepting the help.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So beautiful, brilliant. So, okay, Jessica always wants me to ask before we wrap things up, what advice would you give parents to help their kids be fully engaged?
That's a great question. I mean, my girls are 12 and 9. The best parenting advice I ever got came from my friend and mentor and counselor, a guy named Chris Anderson, who I've been working with for over 20 years. And he said to me, Mike, this is when Michelle, my wife, was pregnant with Samantha. So we were about to have our first. And he said to me, Mike, the most important job you have when your daughter's born is to teach her how to love herself.
Wow.
And I said, really? I hadn't heard anyone say that specifically, just like that. I said, how do I do that? He said, you love yourself and you let her see that. That's how you teach her how to love herself.
Woohoo! On that note, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Well, I've got a number of people like that in my life, but it's got to be my wife, Michelle. I mean, she's a rock star. I'm not even sure what I would do without her, and brings me so much joy. And, is just really the rock of our family. So I'm so grateful for her.
Awesome. And I'll do the woohoo for you then. Woohoo! Where can people go to find your brilliant book and to find out more?
Well, the best place to go is actually on my website, which is mike-robbins.com.
Yep.
And we have a special page for the book, which is mike-robbins.com/work. You can find out all about the book there and order it. And I also recorded 3-hour-long audio programs that are free for people who get the book. So specifically, if you're an entrepreneur or if you're a manager or if you happen to be an individual contributor, it's really for all different types of work that we do.
Fantastic. And so if you didn't catch mike-robbins.com/work, come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to mike-robbins.com/work. Thank you so much, Mike. Before I let you go, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
I think, in the theme of the thing I was just saying about loving ourselves, I think let's all just be kind to ourselves, and acknowledge who you are, what you're doing, not just the quote unquote success that you have, but the courage that it takes just to make the effort. And anybody who's watching this or listening to this, obviously you're committed to your own growth and development, to being inspired, to inspiring others. So I just acknowledge you wherever you are, whatever you are doing, for being that kind of person.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Mike. This has been phenomenal. If this was a ball game, you certainly hit it out of the park. I love your book. I love your work. I'm not just saying it. I've read a lot of books. I read 4 to 5 books each and every week at a minimum, book in, book out. And I love it, love it, love it. It's empowering. It changes the individual. It certainly, if you're running a team, and a family is a team too, that's probably the most important team you got. It teaches you incredible leadership and team building skills. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, bring your whole self to work, and begin sharing your authenticity today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. That was fun. I love it.
Excellent. Do you get twice you're interviewed back then?
I did. Absolutely, man. That gave me a lot of juice. I'm excited for the rest of the day. I appreciate it, man. Good luck getting all settled in, and thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!